Welcome everybody, or welcome back if you've joined us for one of these before. We're really glad to have you here this afternoon. My name is Sam Kramer, and I'm joined by my co-host here, Chris Fletcher with the National Governors Association. We're excited to have you back here for our next Comprehensive Energy Planning Training Series webinar. We are focusing on best practices for stakeholder engagement, and we're really glad to have you here. As a couple of housekeeping remarks, as our speakers are speaking, please put any questions you do have into the chat box or into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to look at those and read them out later on. And then we'll also take questions once all speakers have presented. And also a big thank you to our sponsors, the Department of Energy's Office of State and Community Energy Programs, and also the Office of Electricity for the support of this webinar series. So robust stakeholder engagement is a pretty critical part of any comprehensive planning process. If you have a good stakeholder engagement process, it helps ensure that the key players in a state's energy economy, as well as the general public, are able to provide direction and insight for the plan. And then proper stakeholder engagement also enables the participation of all sectors of a state's economy, and also allows for underserved environmental justice communities, low-income communities, to make sure that their voices are heard as part of the planning process. States that establish and utilize really well done stakeholder engagement procedures, produce plans that have public backing and support from wide swaths of a state's energy economy, and also bolster support for the policy and programmatic decisions that end up being contained in the plan. And so we're really happy to bring three great speakers here who are going to talk about their energy planning efforts and how stakeholder engagement was a key role in them, and some best practices that they learned from stakeholder engagement, and kind of make sure we're thinking about that as you go ahead and for the next iteration of your own plans, how stakeholder engagement can factor in and be a positive influence for that. So our panelists today are Dave Altoff. He is the Director of the Energy Programs Office with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. We have Kenya Stump. She's the Executive Director of the Kentucky Office of Energy Policy, which is the state energy office for the state of Kentucky. And then Dan Burgess, who is the Director of the Maine Governor's Office of Energy. All right, so let's turn things over to our speakers here today, and I think I'd like to start off, Dave. Let's talk about you. Obviously, your energy programs plan has had a lot of work, and you've done a lot of work with stakeholder engagement. So tell us about some of your recent approaches to stakeholder engagement and how that's kind of worked for you.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for getting us together to talk about this important topic. Thanks to NASIO. Thanks to NGA as well for all the support that you guys provide to us as state energy offices. And I know that we've leaned on you and frankly, NASIO, the last time we did sort of our comprehensive energy assessment and put a stakeholder group together, we actually invited NASIO to that group to help us to not only give us an in-state perspective, but an out-of-state perspective. And I think that's kind of where I want to start, which is that, when you're really talking about stakeholder involvement, when you're talking about getting other folks to participate in your planning process or participate in sort of like making sure that you include all opinions, you have to remember that everybody sort of has a story to tell, and that's part of the purpose is to making sure that you give folks a voice. But I would say that you have to make sure that you do that in an organized manner, right? And so one of the things that I think helps to be successful with regards to stakeholder engagement is making sure that, not necessarily that you have rules, but that you have a business process, right? That you're just not showing up unannounced, that you're just not intervening on a meeting elsewhere and then just start asking questions and looking for feedback. I think it's helpful to define, what your work product is, what you're looking to do, what your goals are with regards to your planning or with regards to your stakeholder feedback. It's helpful, I think, to distribute materials in advance. Depending upon what you're looking to do, whether you're really just going to different areas of your state, you have a program to put on, you have information to disseminate, and then you're looking for feedback. It's helpful for the folks that you invite or the folks that are invited to really have some background materials, really to be able to review the information, for you to be able to maybe provide them with an overview in advance. We've found that even doing surveys ahead of time to make sure that folks understand what it is that you're looking to discuss, what information you're looking to get back. I mean, generally people want to be helpful, and they have to understand how it is to be helpful. I mean, in some cases, we've kept some of our groups pretty small. whereby we've almost hand selected, the people who are already interacting with us, whether that be from the industrial sector, from the municipal sector, maybe from education, and we understand that who those folks are who already provide us with feedback, but then when they get in a room with other folks, right, and they sort of hear the direction that's coming from the industrial sector versus the commercial sector versus the municipal sector, it allows them to gain a greater understanding of how their feedback can then be useful. Because ultimately, when we're right now, as we're sort of digging into communities, right, we're digging into making sure that the benefits of the programs that we're developing are relatable and actually occur within environmental justice communities and fence line communities and communities that are overburdened, right? Those folks have stories to tell. They also want to be able to share information or share opportunities, which then we can respond to, or that we can adequately capture, such that we can move forward and actually provide assistance to those communities. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that lots of folks have different. They're going to bring their own ideas, and they're going to bring their own solutions for their issues, not necessarily what you're looking to do all the time. But I think it's helpful if you are clear up front, if you provide upfront information, clear about what the meeting goal is, clear about what information you're trying to gather, and being intentional about it. I think that is a recipe for success. So I'll let it right there because I know our other panelists have some interesting things to say as well. I'm sure I'll come back and have more to say later.
Sure. I think those are some really good starting points there. But I think we should think about, in-person versus virtual. And I know Kenya's got a few things to say about that with KYE3 and the strategies that they put together a couple years ago and how that changed. So Kenya, how about some opening remarks from your perspective?
Sure. Thank you to NASIO and, of course, NGA for the opportunity and for my fellow panelists and their perspective. A lot of what we say today, we all can agree upon. There are a lot of lessons learned across all of our states represented here. I think for us, being a longtime civil servant, I've seen a number of state energy plans, and all of them are very much governor directed energy plans. From a engagement perspective, I think I have the privilege of having witnessed a very comprehensive energy plan almost a decade ago, where it was very much a very long and lengthy stakeholder engagement process on inputs. We had a lot of technical assistance because we were developing at that time a lot of custom models and running scenarios, and that required a lot of education, to Dave's point, education around just our energy systems and energy terminology. And then, with that, we were doing a lot of like climate analysis, and we were looking at a very prescriptive, metric driven, energy plan at that time. I think what we learned there, Sam, is technology changed. This is how long ago it was when we had the fracking boom. So we had a very prescriptive plan. We had a very prescriptive, detailed action, climate action plan. And then all of a sudden, the energy landscape changed due to technology innovation, and a lot of elements of our plan didn't quite make sense because they were so specific to certain types of technology. So it's heartbreaking sometimes to do a lot of planning, and then you have an external influence, such as a technology innovation or a change that drastically changes your energy landscape. And then you realize your plan's already out of date, right? So I think come forward to 2019 and Governor Bashir, and we were in the midst of COVID, and the governor, our previous governor, did not have an energy strategy, didn't feel the need for one. And so Governor Bashir wanted an energy plan. We took the approach of not being as prescriptive in a very detailed plan, but to do more of what we would call a strategy. So a comprehensive energy strategy that set sort of strategic vision and goals with a lot of it centered around Governor Bashir's focus on economic development opportunities, advanced energy, sustainability, community resilience. And those were kind of key core concepts that we were seeing in the early stages. We didn't realize how influential that would be. Fast forward, we've now had to respond to 14 major natural disaster declarations. So this concept of community resilience and advanced energy economic development has really come into play as we came out of COVID. But our perspective there is COVID really changed our landscape of engagement. Now, I think Dave had some very good points. Some of the core principles still remain the same. However, we were greatly challenged because we were going to do regional engagement sessions. We were going to be like in person, like real people to people activities around. At this point, it was around implementation of a strategy. So I think that's important. Do you want to have feedback on building your strategy? Ours was very centered around the directive of Governor Bashir's administration. Or are you looking at stakeholder engagement in terms of like how do you then make it really actionable? How do you get partnership opportunities together? How do you drive project development? And so I think the stakeholder engagement is important across all of those, but for us, our focus is really on project development, partnership opportunities, and how do we get people in a room, but also being sensitive that at the time, everyone was focused on the COVID response, and there wasn't a lot of inertia around energy strategy and implementation when we were just trying to make it through, the pandemic. I think now we're really in Governor Bashir's second term. We're now really looking at, all right, advanced energy economic development, community resilience. And it took us to the second term to really kind of get into stakeholder engagement for what we would call project development and implementation. But I think you have to meet people where they are with stakeholder engagement, and not everybody wants engagement to look the same. And I think we'll hear more about that from the other panelists. And that's been a lesson learned too of how do you pivot? How do you become flexible on your engagement? And how do you understand and meet people where they are? And even with your own state, different regions will expect different types of engagement. And it's very much a local, sector driven approach to engagement. And we have to be able to pivot that quickly with engagement in terms of how we're looking at our strategy and how we approach different sectors.
Great, thanks, Kenya. I really appreciate that. And obviously, now that KYE3 is that process happened a few years ago, but obviously, for let's maybe jump forward to today and Dan's current efforts, finishing up his new energy plan that should be coming out pretty soon. But I think you still got a lot of good lessons learned since it's probably fresh in your mind about reaching out to stakeholders. So, what do you have to say for us, Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Good to be with everyone. I've been busy taking notes from Dave and Kenya about kind of their stakeholder engagement as we are in the midst of doing that for our energy plan. I do want to set the context a little bit from our state. We've had two or three many significant planning opportunities over the last 5 or 6 years, but two I think I want to focus on. One is our Climate Council work, which started right before the pandemic and continued through the pandemic. So we had a lot of the similar challenges that Kenya mentioned. But we had a Climate Council with 5 or 6 different working groups that really reached a number of people depending on the topic and area of interest and expertise. That plan was then published, and now we're kind of in the process of updating that climate plan, and obviously different from an energy plan, but the kind of stakeholders and interested parties are often similar, right, in our planning exercises. And so we had really good engagement through that process, which we were involved in with a number of different state agencies. And then we also have completed an offshore wind roadmap, which there's some overlap with the Climate Council processes that we had, but we structured it pretty similarly. We had a core advisory group, and then had different working groups where they could take detailed and specific information depending on the topic. So whether it was, offshore wind industry, or those interested in, working on issues related to fishing or ocean users, those were kind of more detailed places where we could take recommendations up and have them to consider as a part of the roadmap. And that was published a couple of years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago now. And so we are, for our energy plan, utilizing a lot of the existing constructs that we have, or people that we've talked to engage, right? We are, and for just background, we have Governor Mills directed us to work on how we're going to get to 100% clean energy by 2040. We already have an 80% renewable portfolio standard for 2030, but really looking at, okay, how do we get to 100% clean energy by 2040? So we've, that involves, that involves a lot of, as this group knows, and others, a lot of technical analysis, right? Like, what is the system going to look like between now and 2040? How are we, looking at capacity and, all of the things that come with technical parts of energy plans. And so we have the Brattle Group and Evolved Energy Research as our technical consultants to complete this kind of technical analysis to look at multiple different pathways for how we're going to get there and what does the energy system look like. I think Dave's point, and really about how to go beyond the technical, right, and kind of make this a document which people can, not have to know the details of a forward capacity market or otherwise, is really important to us too. So we're going to take this technical information that we're really excited about, but then also kind of bring it up a level in our overall energy plan, and kind of bring it more towards, okay, what are the key policy areas that we want to focus on, and what are some of the outcomes that we want to see with this technical report as an underlying document to support that work. So we began outreach early fall last year with our consultants. We've held, I think, multiple meetings over Zoom, have worked with the energy group of the Climate Council that I mentioned before. Each webinar has been really well attended, 100 to 150 attendees. We've sought to kind of utilize partner networks to engage more folks where we can. We did questions and feedback through the chat and follow-up emails, posted summaries and all the documents online, and have really tried to expand into areas or to reach people that we may not typically reach, or that aren't coming to the Capitol every day. In addition to that, we offered kind of more detailed stakeholder individual meetings with folks that may have really detailed feedback, or and that could be utilities, industry associations, NGOs, and others, to really kind of seek and get their feedback. And we're still kind of in that process of taking that feedback in, and we're hopeful to publish both this technical analysis and then the overall energy plan in the coming weeks to months. And then I think we're looking at not just Kentucky and Pennsylvania, but what other energy offices have done for energy plans, whether it's Hawaii or Washington or others that have, I think, really good models of, whether it's an interactive dashboard or, clear explainers about the technical findings. We're really looking at kind of other state examples for how to proactively and clearly show what the priorities of the plan are in a way which can be understandable to folks in the state of Maine. And so working through that now, I would say we're interested to hear feedback and examples from this and other forums about how to do that. And then I think at the end, we want to make sure that we're communicating what's in the plan and kind of working on how it's going to be used to kind of advance the directive that we have. And so excited for this conversation, to hear questions, but also to hear from others. And as I want to underscore what the others said of the energy planning can be challenging because the world changes all of the time. But I think the more that kind of know that and can kind of set the directional foundation for the policy and planning work, it can really bring some really good information to it. So that's what's happening in Maine.
Got it. Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks, Dave and Kenya as well for your opening remarks here. I'd like to invite anybody in the audience who has questions to please, put them into the chat box or the Q&A so we can read them out to our presenters. But I'd like to get started here with our conversations. I think we'll just start with kind of an open-ended question here for all three of you. And I would say, what would you say was probably your biggest challenge when engaging with stakeholders for your planning efforts? And how did you kind of work to address that?
I'll go with, go ahead, Dave.
No, go ahead. You got it. You're in there.
No, I think for us, it's really, I would put it in a category of foundational energy literacy in order to have an informed conversation. That's just always a long-term challenge among stakeholder groups. When you get different stakeholder groups together, you may have experts there. You might have people who are coming there because this is just a new interest for them. For us, I think a challenge over the last decade is, and it really builds on Dan and what Dave said, is we're trying to build our capacity so that we have a sustained way to show trends in the energy landscape, foundational like dashboards and accessibility to data. So we don't spend a lot of our engagement on collecting data or explaining things. We're doing a lot more of that with transparency and accessibility, as technology over the last decade has allowed us easier access to data, easier visualizations, because we feel part of our role is to allow people to utilize like our dashboards or our data analytics so that they can come to their own conclusions and then come to an engagement session ready to have a discussion. We've always had a foundational Kentucky energy profile in Kentucky where we do baselining of our production, transmission, generation, distribution of all of our energy sources. That's sort of our foundational document. To Dan's point, now we have technology that allows us to do modeling easier, to show trends and results and visualize. And so I think for us, the challenge is maintaining that kind of technological push that allows more transparency and accessibility to data that used to be very black box, right? You had to come to a meeting, you had to see it. And for us now, I think the challenge is getting people to interact with the data and then coming to a conversations informed and then ready to participate. And I'll throw it to Dave now.
No, I think you said what I was going to say. But I think one of the challenges, frankly, is to make sure that you hear from different people, because we tend to have the same folks who show up to the meetings and give their input, and we're used to them being a part of the process. I think that's one of the things that this virtual environment has lent itself to, from the standpoint of there's a greater opportunity to get participation. We've had to cultivate that. However, I think there's sort of professional participation, and then there's the public participation. And this format lends itself more towards that professional participation. This is a part of my workday. Oh, you're having a meeting at 2:00 on Zoom. Actually, it's 3:00 on Eastern. See, at 2:00 probably for you, Kenya, on Zoom, right? But that does not necessarily lend itself to the sort of the public end of participation. And who is that public? Are those organization or organized groups, right? And how we have to maybe sort of then readjust relative to that this electronic version of interaction is just not a 9 to 5 opportunity. It also does work on those other times, right? So I think that making sure that you get the diversity with regards to your stakeholders in this environment today is important. Frankly, I think it was a problem before as well. Like I said, there tends to be sort of like the same folks are going to show up. It's part of their business is to want to interact on energy or climate issues and be a part of the planning, because they have certain goals. They have certain ideas that they would like to see implemented. And so they're focused on what we do. I think that it's part of our challenge is just to make sure that we get that piece of information, we get that input from the person that we didn't expect to get it from, and that is still the challenge. We try to cultivate that now these days by making sure that we are tapping into other associations, other groups, making sure that they know what it is that we do, and that we are deploying programs. Thankfully, due to IIJA and IRA, our reach is expanding. Right, us as the energy office getting involved in more opportunities than we ever had before, which means that more folks are interested, higher dollar amounts, they're interested. So they should be interested in what our plans are. And we try to cultivate that as part of our sort of planning cycle. But I think the biggest challenge is still making sure you have diversity in the voices that you hear.
The only thing I might add is I think I completely agree with what y'all both said is also the just being aware of how many other processes people could be involved in, and a lot of times that's the folks as was mentioned, that are typically participating, but there can be a number of different overlaps, and the just being aware of kind of how much is being asked of folks, and that you're coordinated where you can be, whether it's other things happening, I think is important. But I would agree with my colleagues on what they said.
And Sam, I would like to say this,
Mhm.
if it hasn't been clear, so state agencies are very good at what we would call community communications, right? I think there's a big difference, and Dan and Dave can add some more color. Community engagement is completely different than communication, right? So engagement implies a two-way street here. Oftentimes you're looking at who's not in the room that needs to be in the room. Those, to Dave's point, that's very difficult, right? A lot of our vulnerable populations are just not in the room. And sometimes it's easy to lend on organizations that represent certain populations, but even then, I don't think the voices are really in the room sometimes. We've had to look, when we look at energy interdependencies, we're now looking at partnering with like food banks to get messaging out or to raise awareness, public health departments, child and family services organizations, addiction recovery centers. So I think that partnership opportunity has really evolved as we've really understood energy interdependencies more in terms of populations that we want to bring into a process of engagement. That said, engagement is still very difficult. It takes a lot of effort. So many times we're in a room and it's really just communicating an effort to someone and then seeing if they really had questions. And I think there's a lot of work in the social sciences that I think energy offices and governors' offices can pull from in terms of, how do we really do community engagement? We're not taught how to do engagement. And I think there are a lot we can lean on by asking people who do this, and a lot of those are social scientists who engage with vulnerable populations, and they know. And so I think it's important to ask for help in community engagement and get someone on your team or as a consultant who really has the knowledge of like how to facilitate that kind of two-way structure.
Let me sorry, Sam, we're not letting you ask your questions, but
No, it's fine. This is
I
great.
think to the point where budgets allow professional consultation is extremely helpful. Just to pick on what Kenya just said, I think it helps with the setting the scene and the dialogue, and then I also think can put has put us in an ability to be able to maybe more focus on listening, to have that kind of dialogue there, and to deal with if there are kind of contentious issues that come up. It's helpful to have that both with outreach and to deal with the logistics and setting up of the meeting and all the things that come with it.
Yeah, I want to double down on that. We've specifically in our office attempted to hire sort of community relations specialists because it's a skill set that we don't have, right? We have energy professionals, right? We have folks with scientific degrees, and here we are trying to like build plans and talk about the things that we want to do that have impact in the community, but we do not necessarily have the tools within our own office to sort of like understand the social science behind that, right? Like, love that you said that, Kenya. You know what I mean? Like, that's a science as well, right? Interacting with society and how you do that. And there are folks out there that are really good at that. And especially with the focus on environmental justice communities, within our agency, we have an environmental justice office and an EJ coordinator, and we're trying to really lean into that office, not necessarily because it's just something we have to do. It's a skill set that we don't have, that we have not been able to sort of grow ourselves. We need to do that. Frankly, I have trouble getting those types of positions because they say, "Oh, you're the state energy office." That's not a civil service title that you should be able to acquire. Like, well, we need to change the way we think about this, right? Because it's a really, really important part of what we do, right? And so, that's the evolution of our office. That's the evolution of what the comprehensive part of energy planning, right? Part of that comprehensive is who are we doing this planning for, and who does it affect, and how do we connect with those folks? And you actually need the right skill sets to do that. And so I think that's something that we're absolutely learning. Doesn't mean we're being super successful at it. It's just first part of solving a problem is identifying that you have a problem. And I think that's a little bit of it, right? Is just that we need to be able to partner with folks who are already out there and doing that for various other reasons, like what Kenya was saying. It doesn't mean that our challenges or issues are exactly the same, but the outreach portion and getting to those communities, that's the same.
So I now have like a million questions based on this initial conversation. This has been really great. But I think so. I think what I want to do is kind of dig in and kind of unpack a few of these statements that you all made. Obviously, you've mentioned, one of the things is with stakeholder engagement, you're bringing all of these different groups together, and you've mentioned how different groups have different perspectives. And I'm going to dig into actually one of the audience questions here for a little bit. How have you addressed maybe difficult feedback or contentious issues that have popped up in terms of maybe certain policy decisions you're considering? Obviously, Dan, you mentioned, having, professional consultation is extremely helpful, but I was kind of wondering if there are other ways that you found that you've managed to kind of work through those issues. Like, do you think you need to make it to consensus, or sometimes is it good to have a little tension still unresolved?
I think that depending on the construct of your plan and your planning process and the expectations you're setting up front, I think it's really helpful to think about that up front. If it's a document that the state agency is responsible for, is it the kind of the views of the agency, or is it a consensus document that everyone participating has agreed upon? So I think understanding that going into it is really important. And then I think it's if you're seeking kind of consensus or agreement, or there's a contentious issue, I think again, depending on the constructs, I think it's okay to note that these folks felt this way and these folks felt this way. I think that can be a healthy way to show that there was robust conversation around something, and that there were multiple viewpoints of it. I think if it's the state agency's document, and I still think it's okay to say that there are some that feel this and some that feel that, or and I think that can be okay. I don't think it's always easy. In fact, I know we all know it's not easy on some issues, but I think that's one way to deal with it.
Any other ideas? Dave or Kenya?
I can't say it better than Dan said it, so I'm good.
I can't either. Dan pretty much nailed it.
So another thing I want to unpack is going back to what you said at the beginning, Dave, when you mentioned that one of the key things you found as a best practice here is, in addition to the business process, when you're looking for feedback, you want to have background materials, items for the audience to review in advance to kind of come back and maybe give comments on. Where in the planning process do you feel like it would be most ideal to provide background materials to potential stakeholders? Would you think you'd want to have it maybe when you're thinking about the first draft of a plan, or would you want to have it when the plan is maybe closer to near final and you want some last minute feedback, or would you rather have it throughout that process and be a little bit of give and take the whole time you're drafting the plan?
I think when I was talking about that, I was certainly thinking about it up front, right? So we all sort of go into any of these planning processes, certainly with some type of outline, some type of sort of skeleton of what it is that you want to address, and whether it's basically a comprehensive energy plan or maybe it's sort of subject matter specific. Um, and then I think that I had also mentioned this, that I think it's also good at times to do some, some polling or surveying in advance, right? Like if you're going to gather a group together, you want to sort of find out like what areas are they most interested in addressing, right? And so therefore you're able to sort of, if you want engagement from these folks, then you're going to want to make sure that that's part of what you're putting up as a part of your planning meeting or the part of your discussion purposes is that you want to make sure you connect with what they're essentially bringing to the party, right? You can't just sort of leave all of this to chance. I mean, you could, but then things are going to happen, and you're going to wind up with maybe contentious conversations or the whole thing going in a different direction than what you expected it to go. I mean, I tend to find that people tend to play nice as long as they know what the rules are and as long as they know what the purpose of the meeting is and how it's going to go. If you take some of their feedback at the beginning from the standpoint of explaining thoroughly what it is that we're going to be doing, this is sort of an outline of the sections of the plan that we want to discuss during this meeting. And you're actually then sort of they're seeing possibly some of their feedback or some of their responses included in what you're already considering, then they're engaged. They know that this is not just sort of like, hey, I'm here, so therefore that you get me to sign a sign-in sheet at the door, and then later on I see my name as a part of a contributor to the plan, right? Like we've all seen that before, right? Which is like, hey, everybody who ever attended a meeting, they're then all a contributor to the plan. See, it was comprehensive. I think making that connection up front, doing a little homework up front, doing some surveying up front. Now, it's easier to sort of survey, I would say, professionals once again. That's sort of that sort of professional involvement, but it's sort of the same mindset though, is that you want to sort of be forthright. You want to if you do some homework up front, if you provide some information up front, that connects better than later on after the meeting's over. It's like, hey, we're going to follow up with you. They're already engaged because they felt like they were a part of the process, just not as a part of the meeting, but as also a part of building what it is that they're there to comment on and they're there to provide instructional.
And then Kenya, I also want to go back. I know you've answered this in the Q&A box, but I want to kind of have you elaborate on this just for folks that may be, listening into this, once this training is done, is that, early on you mentioned that one of the key things that you wanted to have was kind of an education around the systems and the terminology that go into energy. You want to make sure that folks have that base level of knowledge to better understand the issues they're going to be speaking to and responding to. And so tell us more about, how did you kind of get that base level of knowledge out to the stakeholders you wanted to engage with? What was the education and training for that like?
Well, I think training training and education sounds very formalized, right? So you have to embed kind of energy literacy into how you present, in our case, our office, right? So everything we do is about presenting products at various level, whether it might be, an NREL complex model, as Dan said, like on resource planning, like how do we break that down into, a 5-minute YouTube video of me saying, okay, we did this thing. Here's what it shows. This is how it's impactful to the citizens of the state, right? So I think it's everything from, we've done individual, 5-minute walkthroughs of our products and we throw it up on YouTube. We've done very extensive, like in person, let's take you through Kentucky's energy profile and what that means. But we're starting to lean more and more on these snippets of kind of what we call Energy 101 videos, where, I'm a big fan of like whiteboard drawings that can show like what a transmission system is. Here's a distribution system. Here's how the electrons go from a power plant to your house. Here are the things you should know about that, a step down transformer or, rates. So I think I will say the benefit of technology innovation is it allows us to communicate more rapidly on things. An example, we have an affordability dashboard where we talk about energy burden in Kentucky, energy bill analysis, water bill analysis. I did a 10-minute, probably less than 10-minute video on energy affordability, energy burden, trends among, utility bills. And then that naturally led into, well, here's where you go to get assistance, weatherization assistance program. Here's what you can do, tax incentives. That's really where we've gone a lot, is self-paced. And then our in-person efforts then are the relationships with organizations that can help deliver our content. We're still doing that two-way, right? But I think we have to be very strategic, because we found in a lot of our engagement, knowing if someone coming to your meeting is there to be an observer or an active, like, yes, I'm in it for the long haul. I want to be at every meeting, and I'm giving you feedback, and I'm doing the work products, because we give out homework. We're going to expect you to do things. How we engage with observers that just kind of want to keep up with what we're doing, versus then how do we engage with those that really want to, do the homework, like go into a class. Like, we're going to expect you to actively participate. And I think technology allows us, to Dave and Dan's point, we do surveys to find out, how do you want to participate? Are you here just to look and listen, or are you here to actively engage? From that, we can then engage separately with the different groups. I hope that's what you wanted, Sam, but
No, I think that's all great. But I think a follow-up, and this is also an audience question, is did you hire someone for those Energy 101 videos, or was that internal staffing? And if it was external, can you share the RFP for that?
yeah, so it wasn't an RFP. So I think I'll tell you Energy 101. So, one, we lean on our academic institutions, because they not only have energy experts, but they also have educational and social work professionals that can help you design materials. And oftentimes they have these already made, ready delivered. A lot of Energy 101 videos are already out there through DOE, has a great set of Energy 101 videos. I'll put in the link. There's a great gentleman that does whiteboard videos on everything from climate to, electricity generation, and they're easy, they're digestible. We use a lot of interns. I will say this. So we have a robust intern program, and we get a lot of marketing communications interns. We don't, we're not really getting a lot of engineers, because I really need social work, communications, and marketing folks who can translate the tech stuff into digestible pieces of information. Our intern program has been very successful in just helping us translate and figure out, how do we level up kind of this energy literacy in the state, because that's where you get into sometimes contentious issues. Coming in full circle, is oftentimes we've been in hard lessons learned, is when you're in a meeting and you realize not everyone's on the same page, right? And then that's led to some misunderstandings, disagreements, and you have to do a lot of backtracking. So that foundational understanding is kind of essential to us being able to have that kind of informed, and we all want to have a productive, engagement session.
Great. I think that's really helpful. I want to turn things over to Chris Fletcher to see if you had any questions for any of our speakers at this point, as my co-host here.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. And thank you, panelists. This is a great conversation and really helpful. A couple of you have touched on it previously, but I know we've talked a lot about how you get people to the table and engage with stakeholders. What are some tips and tricks for keeping people at the table? Once you release the plan, that relationship isn't necessarily over. Could you share a little bit about how you stay engaged with the communities that you're working with, and maybe share some strategies for how to do that effectively?
Well, I'll go first. So I would say our energy plan is still being completed, but we're thinking about, or still to be completed, but we're thinking about that. The other planning efforts that I've talked about, one of the things that I've found really useful and helpful for the implementation of the plan too is to do at least kind of annual updates on where you're at on those recommendations, and that I think it's helpful to show progress being made or where there's more work to be done. That's not necessarily kind of the specific, back to engagement, but is at least, this isn't a report going on the shelf, right? Like this is what we said, and this is how we're doing, and that can drive kind of engagement and conversations. And so we found that to be a useful tool.
I don't know about tips and tricks, but I think that one of the things that we've done is that, you know, we try to stay engaged because ultimately planning is about deployment, right? And so we tend to have, some working groups or some consortiums, and specifically in Pennsylvania, we have our Drive Electric Coalition, and we have our Energy Storage Consortium. There's two that come off the top of my head. Done some reports on food waste to energy, et cetera. And those tend to be communities of folks that, you know what I mean, that are engaged in sort of that sector, and they're interested in what's going on from the standpoint of funding assistance opportunities, or progress that's being made in the state within that sector. And that sort of keeps that sort of interaction alive, right? So therefore, when we come back to a comprehensive energy planning session or a climate action planning or whatever that may be, that encompasses sort of their subject matter, then they're re-engaged relative to that comprehensive energy planning exercise. I think it's hard to keep alive sort of like a sort of a multi-sector group. But if you break it down into the areas in which they're interested in, and you continue to sort of like nurture that relationship, I think then it's ready made for you next time. And so I think that, understanding that some of these processes that may be sort of one-off or one-time things, there is sort of a cadence to them. As Kenya said, sometimes maybe a certain administration or a governor comes in and says, we don't really need to do that energy planning, right? That creates sort of like a sort of a hurdle, right? Or sort of a disconnect, maybe is a better way to put it. Nothing you can really do about that. But if you sort of stay up relative to that energy sector, and you sort of nurture that coalition or that consortium or that work group as a part of what you do as the state energy office, then I think ultimately you have this sort of bench to go to at that time when you're looking to do the larger, more comprehensive planning document.
Thanks, Dave. Chris, I can jump in with one more question, and then I'll turn it back to you. But I just want to follow up on that. You mentioned having that bench to go to and building that trust. That is, I think, pretty huge in terms of making sure you're getting the right stakeholder at the table to really open up about what we need to talk about. And so how do you kind of build trust with community members who maybe aren't as trusting of government or interested in giving feedback? I mean, that seems like, that's obviously challenging, and that kind of leads into, some of these underserved communities. There's a low trust level that needs to be built up first.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit, and I'm sure Dan and Ken, you'll have something much better to say than I do. But I think that you need to have a partner in that community who can vouch for you. A couple times, I've been involved, and when somebody stands up and says, "Hey, that person knows what they're talking about. Like, this is a real opportunity. We should pay attention." That is actually what builds trust. And so you're not going to walk in the door with that if you're not a known quantity. And so I think that that's, once again, this is where this sort of there's a science to this, right? There's a profession around this. There are folks that are probably already engaged in that community. And who are they? And what do they do? And what do they care about? And does it connect together with what you're looking to do? And so maybe that's hiring a third party. Maybe that's hiring somebody who already does work in that community. Once again, it could be part of just sort of doing the homework. But I think trust is earned. You can't walk in with it. And helping to earn it is when somebody stands up next to you who's already trusted in the community, and they say, you should listen to this person, or they're not here to to pull a fast one. This is somebody that you can work with. I think that is how it actually happens.
Yeah, just to build on Dave, and he couldn't have said it better, but building on that concept of trust. So for us, I think you all know I've been a long time civil servant. I think there's a lot of wisdom that comes with age, and I've noticed that trust comes with admitting like vulnerability in a space. So, as a state agency executive director, it's not my natural inclination to say that my office is vulnerable, right, or that we're in a vulnerable space. But I think being truthful and trustworthy, it meaning like admitting when I don't have all the answers, or, like to Dan's point, if we're doing an activity where we're forecasting the future, you want to talk about vulnerability and uncertainty and, getting it right, or admitting that this is one way it could look, but we're not 100% certain. And a lot of stakeholders, we get into a space where we're not 100% certain about what's going to happen in the future, but we're trying to design policies and get feedback. I think it's just important to admit that I may not have all the answers, but I'm willing to be here as a resource and as a partner, and like work through this as we evolve. That's it's uncomfortable. So a lot of this is we have to live in a space of being uncomfortable in situations, and through that being uncomfortable, we then end up with, as Dave said, you end up with people then saying, oh, well, this is what's important to me, and this is how I want to work on this, and this is what this means to me. And when you can get to that point, I think you can really make strides moving forward. But you know, saying I'm here from the government, here to help, doesn't really get you a lot, right? I think I'm from the government, and I'm here to be in this space with you, right? And to provide as much information as I can to help us, move through this process, whatever it may be. Um, and that's my kind of final thoughts, building on Dave. But yeah, trust. It's hard, and it begins with kind of that vulnerable space and being uncomfortable. Once you can get past that, then you can do some really cool things.
I'm going to kick it back to you, Chris, if you want to ask one more question.
Sure. Thank you again, everyone. Probably likely that some of the folks on the call are from states that are either just beginning an energy planning process or are thinking about doing that shortly. If you were at the front of a process again and starting to think about key steps that you would take as you were starting to scope this out to bring stakeholder engagement into it, what would be some of those key first steps as you're standing up this process?
I'd call NASIO and NGA first off and ask for who's doing this right now and who just did it and how did they do it, and give me some examples, like this webinar. I'm kind of joking, but I mean, I think you gotta hear what's worked well, and kind of learn from and emulate some of the best practices from other jurisdictions who are doing the same work. So I think that's one step. Broadly, I think on the stakeholder engagement, again, the budgeting, or if allowable, having some professional, even kind of third party help to help you run the meetings and structure things. I would do that. And I think, the way I try to think about some stakeholder engagement is really starting as broadly as you can, and then kind of those who are the kind of key players, the folks that will have some interest, or folks that you want to make sure are at least brought into the process early. And then I think, and if folks aren't interested, they'll maybe self-select out and not participate. But I think you want to really start as broad as you can to ensure engagement. And then, like we talked about, think about who is, even though you're starting broad, who are you not really thinking of that another trusted partner might have relationships or thoughts on, that could help, that could or should be at the table. I think as the Kenny and David mentioned, there's a lot more tools now, as websites and different types of polling, forums, stakeholder feedback. So I would think about how to use new tools to reach people, as well as kind of clarity on. You want people that also know what you're expecting your process to look like. We're going to have monthly meetings. This is when you can comment. This is what we're thinking the process is. So kind of laying that out too. Not just what are you going to do, but how are you going to do it and what's your vision?
Echoing what Dan said, I think who's not in the room, identify that early. To Dave's point, I have professional stakeholders, and that's it. And I love them, right? But I know they're going to come every time. I know who they are. I think it's getting the voices that aren't in the room in the room. Um, the best stakeholder engagement processes I've ever been a part of have had a third party facilitator, because if it's your project and you're trying to facilitate it, it's, to Dan's earlier point, it's very hard to listen to the room if you're doing the facilitation, and it takes a lot of energy. And then I also think, the people who aren't in the room get to know. I'm just going to use the example of low income populations. Talk to social service workers, talk to food bank professionals, talk to professionals who already engage low income populations, and ask them, how do you engage with them? We found out low income populations do a lot of engagement through prepaid cellular phones. And in Kentucky, time is a privilege for many low income populations. So, and they may not have access to time to be on a Zoom on a computer. So, understanding that, the low income population's preferred method of communication, and again, how they want to communicate, really changes your strategy. If you know that, they're going to be using a prepaid cell phone and they've got prepaid minutes, and how do we do engagement, and what technology can we use? And then I mentioned this in the chat, wraparound services. If you don't have a budget, or you can't partner with organizations that provide wraparound services, um, childcare, transportation, food goes a long way, time of a meeting. So I think there's just a lot of learning around the populations you want to engage, and working with people who already are engaging with those populations. Um, and I'll turn it over to Dave to see if he's got anything to fill in.
Yeah, one last thing to say, and this may be a little bit do as I say, not as I do. But I think the high end of this is that it's easy to fall into stakeholder engagement. Okay, how much do I have to do? Where do I have to go? How many people do I need to touch? And in reality, it should probably be, what do I need to get from the stakeholder engagement? Is probably the first question. And then it gets into technology tools, and I think that's where it's important to sort of tend to these work groups, and have these sort of like this subject matter expertise that you are connecting with on a regular basis, because that's your bench. And then when you ask yourself, hey, what do I need to get out of the stakeholder engagement? You already have a good idea of who's out there. Yes, some of those might be some of those professional commenters, right? Those professional stakeholders, as Kenya calls them. And they're going to be there, right? But then looking beyond that, like what do I need? What do I need to get out of my stakeholder engagement? And therefore, then that may lead you to an opportunity or a population that you're not currently working with, and that's where maybe you need to plan for, as Dan said, for some professional help, right? Or to sort of like make a run at getting that type of engagement, because that's what you need, rather than how much do I have to do? Because that does factor in.
Thank you all. I appreciate that, and throw it back to you, Sam.
Great. And so we are at time here. So I want to just say a big thank you to all three of our speakers today. I thought it was a wonderful conversation. I really learned a lot, took a lot of notes here. We know we did touch on stakeholder engagement in terms of underserved and low-income communities. We are going to be having a deeper dive into that next week, or not next week, next month, excuse me, as part of our next webinar series entitled "Ensuring Equitable Outcomes." So please feel free to rejoin us for that, and we're hoping to see you soon. Otherwise, have a great rest of the afternoon and a great rest of your week, and we'll see you in a month.